Good evening, I'm Katerina Georgieva. Here's what's making news right now.
I'm a lucky, fortunate individual. A lot of them weren't. They were killed on the first day or so.
First part was military training, the second part was officer training, and the third part was artillery training with gases, artillery pieces, field pieces.
I would say that the Detroit, Windsor area was just a really beautiful, clear image, and one of the things you can see in it is the water patterns, the sediment patterns coming from Lake St. Clair into Lake Erie.
Thank you for joining us. Veterans and Windsorites came together in large numbers for Remembrance Day this year. It's the first large ceremony at the city's cenotaph downtown since the COVID-19 pandemic began. Our Jason Vio spoke with some of the veterans in attendance about their memories of war and the importance of remembrance.
Charles Davis is 99 years old. He went overseas in 1941. It was September 1st when he arrived in Scotland, the beginning of his service to this country.
Served Normandy, France, Belgium, Holland, and Germany. That's about it.
Davis was a private in the Canadian Army, handling ammunition and other supplies. He says today has been an emotional one, being back in person with other veterans and community members since COVID-19 restrictions didn't allow this last year.
Well, I like to think of people that are gone. I'm a lucky, fortunate individual. A lot of them weren't. They were killed on the first day or so.
Davis describes the times of war as hectic, but some good came of it too.
I went to London and I met a gal and got married in 1943, and we were married for over 68 years. She just passed away 10 years ago last February.
I had guys' friends killed, like the two machine gunners that night were just slaughtered right there.
Bernard Cote fought in the Korean War in 1950. On Remembrance Day, though, his mind travels to France, where his brother was killed in the Second World War at the age of 21 years old.
One of our family, there were three of us in the service.
I think about all the times my father fought in a war, my grandfathers all fought in the war, First World War, my dad, Second World War, all my brothers are in the service. I was in the service, so it's a tough time.
And sitting right near the front, veteran Roger DeGuire, who served in the Canadian Army in the 1960s, and his wife, Dot Emery.
When you sign up to being a veteran, to join the Army or the Air Force or any of the services there, you're signing the blank check, which includes your life if needed.
We were able to come out all together and at least sit within 3 meters of each other, even if we have to wear the mask or whatever. It's the closeness that you feel closer to your veterans and to our different comrades.
Jason Vio, CBC News, Windsor.
And we'll have much more local coverage of Remembrance Day coming up a little later in the show, including a profile of a Windsor man who is not only a war vet, he's also a centenarian. Hundreds of City of Windsor staff could soon be off the job. 1 in 5 have yet to declare their COVID-19 vaccination status, and the deadline to do so is Monday. Now, officials are making contingency plans to ensure services aren't impacted with fewer staff. The city's policy mandates that all staff must be vaccinated or face suspension without pay unless an exemption is granted. Similar mandates are in effect in neighboring municipalities. It will be up to City Council to decide what the next steps are for those who stick with their decision to not get their shots. The rules apply to employees, council, contractors, and volunteers. Meanwhile, the Windsor Police face a vaccination deadline of November 26th.
Members are concerned. Obviously, any of these members that are going to go on an unpaid leave, it's going to have a detrimental impact on them, not only financially. We've learned of late that there are other ramifications that are going to come with this policy, things like pension adjustments, the loss of benefits, no accrual of certain benefits they receive in the collective agreement. So as a result of that, the association has filed a grievance about the reasonableness of our policy.
The association has nearly 700 members who are part of the service. As of earlier this week, about 30 or so members are still unvaccinated, with about 10 partially vaccinated. The association president says he encourages members to get vaccinated, but represents all members, including those who are hesitant. Meanwhile, the province is reporting 642 new COVID-19 cases today. That's the most on a single day in more than a month, and a roughly 46% jump from the same day last week. Most new cases are in Toronto with 74, 48 were in Windsor, Essex. The Sudbury Public Health Unit has far and away the most active infections per 100,000 people, with about 134.6. Windsor, Essex currently has more than 50 active infections per 100,000 people. Today's figures come after the province said it is pausing its plan to lift capacity limits in remaining higher risk settings out of an abundance of caution. NASA has picked our city to show off the capabilities of its new satellite, Landsat 9. The new spacecraft is floating around Earth and above Windsor while keeping track of climate change. CBC's Ashta Shetty has more on the satellite and its snapshots of Windsor.
I'm standing here by Riverside Drive, and far, far up in space might be NASA's new satellite, Landsat 9, looking down on Windsor. Each day, the satellite snaps thousands of photos, but some of its best beauty shots were of this region.
This picture recently released by NASA showing parts of Windsor, Detroit, and Lake St. Clair.
One of the aspects for Landsat that we're focusing on is water quality. Landsat is used, for example, to look at harmful algal blooms, get early detection of those algal blooms, which has been an issue, particularly in Lake Erie in the past. Other things that you can see in this image, of course, you see the agricultural patterns, the crops, the rectangular fields all over southern Ontario and Michigan. You see a lot of cumulus clouds sort of getting in the way. But then you also see the cities of Detroit and Windsor and the Detroit Metropolitan Airport.
But that's not all. NASA also released this picture of the Chatham area farms, Landsat 9 tracking surface temperature in this area.
Water in Lake St. Clair being colder than the land in general. And then the arrows are pointing out some greenhouses, which of course are bright in the visible wavelengths, but they also appear very cold in the thermal infrared wavelengths.
Now, the data collected by Landsat 9 could prove to be useful to local organizations like the Great Lakes Institute for Environmental Research at the University of Windsor, but there are some limits to the satellite technology.
You know, we used satellite, the Landsat satellites back in 2000 for tracking algal blooms in Western Lake Erie over an entire summer, and we only ended up with one image that had cloud cover of less than 30% that was usable. So that's one of the challenges with the satellites is cloud cover obscuring the image.
Apart from shots of Windsor, the first few pictures from Landsat 9 also included a look at some other places around the world, including this striking picture of the Himalayas, pictured here with shrinking glaciers and changing lake levels. And this picture of Australia's Kimberley coast with a dark green border of mangroves dividing land from the deep, dark blue Indian Ocean. Ashta Shetty, CBC News, Windsor.
Back to our Remembrance Day coverage now. The poppy is 100 years old this year, and so is a LaSalle man who is a veteran of the Second World War. Dale Molnar paid a visit with Ralph Mulholland this week to get his perspective on the war and his advice on how to prevent them in the future.
The training and officer training was really unpleasant.
100-year-old Ralph Mulholland lives at the Seasons Royal Oak Village retirement home in LaSalle with his 103-year-old wife Melba. Mulholland was a staff officer at the National Defense Headquarters in Ottawa during the Second World War. He was involved in organizing munitions shipments to the forces fighting in Europe. During his officer training, he lost some hearing because he was too close to a cannon during an exercise.
Well, I was in such a hurry. I hollered fire for the first shot, and I hadn't got far enough away from the barrel, and it kind of burst my head.
After the war, he became a doctor and practiced in Sandwich West Township from 1952 to 1985, during which time he delivered about 2,000 babies.
I delivered 6 one day.
This year, Mulholland turned 100 along with the Remembrance Day poppy, but this year also saw the return of the Taliban to power in Afghanistan. Mulholland doesn't blame U.S. President Joe Biden for pulling American troops. He blames the Afghan leaders and military for the takeover, but he questions the decision to go into Afghanistan in the first place.
They were so out to get that chap that had pulled 9/11 on them. They didn't think right. They were so anxious to get him.
Mulholland is also disappointed governments have not heeded the warnings of former U.S. President Dwight Eisenhower.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
And that's the trouble now. The industrial is bigger than the military, and they want to sell planes and sell tanks and trucks and everything they can.
Mulholland says governments should cut back on military spending.
I think Eisenhower, he saw it back then. He'd been through a war. He saw it and he called it and he warned it, but no. Money talks, and there's a lot of money to be made.
Dale Molnar, CBC News, LaSalle.
For the past 4 years, Riverside Pie Cafe has been showing support for veterans by baking poppy cookies, with all the proceeds going to the Riverside Royal Legion. And in the last 2 days, they've sold more than 450 of the treats.
Obviously, to honor those who fought for our freedom, and we wanted to do something to support our local Legion. So the Riverside branch is just kitty corner to us, so do something. We sold over 200 yesterday and have about 200 more to sell today. So each year we get more and more community support, which is really great to see. But yeah, it's been really good. It's great to do something not only for the community, but again to pay respects to those who have fought for us and fought for our freedoms. Baking so many of these cookies. I'm sure they're sick of it by now, but it's for a really great cause. So everybody in this team has done a great job. The girls in the back did an amazing job decorating and cooking all of them. So yeah, pretty much, yeah. So this year they made the most we ever have. I think there's probably around 500 or so cookies this year. So yeah, it's been a great, we've had great feedback from it.
There aren't a lot of people buying electric vehicles in Ontario, and critics say they know why. The Ontario government canceled a rebate program several years ago, and that means the province will have trouble meeting emissions reduction targets. Lisa Shing with more.
As the push to go electric picks up speed, Canada is seeing more EVs on the road. Even though numbers in Ontario lag far behind other provinces, drivers here are thinking about it.
I do like around 4 hours a day of driving, so it is pretty expensive.
I would love to. If I had the ability to, I would definitely prefer an electric vehicle, I think.
Part of that indecision, Ontario no longer has a rebate program, axed 3 years ago. After that, sales went down by 50%, and it's never quite picked up since.
If we had like an incentive, it would be better.
Would that make a difference for you?
Sure, that would make me think about it, at least.
A report from a market analytics firm shows in the third quarter of 2021, electric cars accounted for about 3% of auto sales in Ontario. That's lower than PEI and the Yukon, 3 times lower than Quebec at 9.9% of sales, and far behind BC, leading the country at 13%. EV adoption is actually part of the province's own plan to reach targets set out in the Paris Accord Treaty fighting climate change. In it, it says EV adoption would account for about 1/6 of the emissions reduction. But the Auditor General says that's a lofty goal because there aren't any incentives. All of the other provinces beating out Ontario have them.
I'm not going to give rebates to the guys that are buying $100 and some odd $1,000 cars, millionaires.
I'm far from being a millionaire. If Doug Ford was serious about helping make life more affordable for people when it comes to transportation, we would be rapidly supporting people being able to buy electric vehicles.
We're not doing that great.
Kara Clearman has owned electric cars for the last decade. The president of not-for-profit Plug and Drive had access to provincial rebates.
There's an assumption that we're going to have all this EV adoption. But at this point, the province isn't doing anything to make that happen.
Instead, Ford says his government is supporting the industry by putting millions of dollars into retooling auto plants to manufacture electric vehicles. A significant move, but critics say we need to take action sooner. Lisa Shing, CBC News, Toronto.
Meanwhile, Canada has joined a group of countries and car makers vowing to accelerate the transition to low-emission vehicles at COP26 in Glasgow. And there's another Scottish city where they're taking sharp aim at cutting emissions. As Chris Brown reports, Dundee has become a leader in the electric vehicle revolution in hopes that others will follow.
If one of the aims of COP26 is getting people on an accelerated path to switch from polluting vehicles to electric ones, that road may go through the Scottish city of Dundee, about an hour from the summit.
I must admit, you don't have the rattles and bangs as you normally do.
Much of Dundee's city vehicle fleet is now electric, including Bob Donaghy's garbage truck, or bin lorry as the Scots say. Kids gave cool names to the rest of the new electric fleet, like Leonardo DiChargio. 20% of Dundee's taxis are electric, and the city has installed charging hubs at key locations. With the city taking the lead, Fraser Crichton says people and businesses are following.
The infrastructure has to come in first before people will then start buying.
These retractable EV chargers, operated by a phone app, are another novel feature. They don't take up space, and they make electric vehicles accessible to more people.
51% of the population in Dundee live in tenements, so they do not have driveways. They're not going to be able to charge at their own home.
But while governments can kickstart the process, getting enough chargers to power the whole of the UK will be so expensive it will require a new way of thinking, says this e-transport advocate. She says it means ending subsidies for fossil fuels.
When you look at how much is invested in fossil fuels nowadays, and you direct it potentially towards that funding gap that we are experiencing, wow, the change could be very significant, isn't it? It's about putting the money where we should be putting it.
Here in Glasgow, 100 countries and car companies have pledged to expedite the switch to EV vehicles, including Canada.
This is how you encourage others who are hesitating to make that commitment that they should jump on board and join us.
That vision of a zero-emission vehicle future is not unanimous here. Some big car makers such as Volkswagen and Toyota didn't sign the pledge, apparently worried it will take too long to ramp up all of that new infrastructure. Chris Brown, CBC News, Glasgow.
Let's take a live look outside there. We've possibly got some showers coming this evening and into tomorrow. If you were out earlier today, it was sunny one moment and then all of a sudden it started to look quite dark and stormy. Colette Kennedy will be here right after the break and she will have your full weather forecast. Stay with us. Colette Kennedy is here now for a look at our weather forecast. Colette, a couple of hours ago, it really took a dark turn when we looked outside the window, and it wasn't just because of the sunset. What's going on?
Yeah, especially in contrast to earlier, right? And some of the mild conditions and then temperatures kind of falling off. So look at some of these readings. I don't know if you were watching last night, but for those of you that were, I sort of talked about how I thought this system was going to track in and allow for some temperatures like this, and there it is. So I feel good about that forecast because we made it. 19 Windsor, look at London, 17 degrees, even St. Catharines into the mid-teens, and then elsewhere it was an easterly flow that kept the reading still above seasonal, but not as remarkable, right? And then the temperatures, cooling down as now the rain associated with this front is beginning to edge in. So as that comes in, we find the temperatures dropping off. The cloud cover didn't help either. And a look at those winds, because I do want to show you not just the sustained winds, the gusts. We're seeing some of those gusts at times have certainly been exceeding 30 kilometers an hour. And there's some of that rain. Although in many areas it's been kind of spotty and lighter in nature, we do have some heavier downpours and more significant stuff that's now pushing off towards the east and continuing to track eastward. It makes haste, though, so this moves through really quite quickly. And then we get into some clearing. I suggest trying to enjoy some of that part of the day tomorrow, because the wraparound on the backside of this system will bring some scattered showers back in. And then as we look into Saturday, say it ain't snow, the risk for some wet flurries kind of mixing in with a few isolated showers into Saturday, but not heavy rain that we'll have to worry about. There's some of those winds, like I say, kicking in more from the south as we get into the latter part of the day tomorrow. We'll be finding them exceeding some of the gusts at times, exceeding 50 kilometers an hour. But look, tonight, again, it's going to move out pretty quickly, so it'll be gone by early tomorrow morning. The temperature then, the high 12, but it will be falling off. And then the colder air is going to be in place. Daytime highs, okay, but look at those overnight lows, Katerina. Those are going to be chilly.
Absolutely. Got to bundle up. Thank you so much, Colette.
You're welcome.
When we come back, we're going to take you to Russia, where they're seeing some dramatic effects of climate change. Stay with us. Climate change is having some of its most dramatic effects in the Arctic. Northern regions around the world are warming as much as 3 times faster than the global average. And that's melting the permafrost, which in turn allows the release of tons of greenhouse gases that have been frozen in the soil for millennia. And the largest mass of permafrost on the planet is in Russia, which will face multiple challenges as the ground continues to thaw.
This is one of the coldest places on Earth, and yet there's no permafrost. There are still places where the permafrost is preserved, but every year, more and more of it is lost. One of the main problems with the permafrost thaw is that there's a huge amount of organic carbon within it. If you take the weight of all these roots and rotting organic matter in this permafrost, only on the territory of the Yakutia alone, it turns out that the weight of all these roots is greater than the entire land biomass of the whole planet Earth. All the trees and shrubs on our planet weigh less than these grass roots in this region alone.
Organic carbon, which is being stored in permafrost soils, it is ancient in terms of time. It dates back to tens of thousands of years. In the future, most of the global greenhouse gas emissions that will be produced by thawing permafrost are concentrated in one country. So even if this discussion will be raised on the fields of the COP26 or any forthcoming conference on climate, this will be, of course, politically charged.
There is no unique solution, no single solution to global warming. We're working here to prove that the ecosystems that we're creating will help in the fight.
We're near the end of our program tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. And before we go, we'll leave you with another look back at some of the sights and sounds from today as Windsor marked Remembrance Day. Have a nice evening.